announcement. There we go.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It was interesting. It did say it was recording before. But just in case my whole preamble wasn't heard, I will give the highlights. Commissioners present include Commissioners Love, Kim, Manfredi, and Morris. And this evening is session A of the Boston Civic Design Commission Design Subcommittee on Tuesday, June 17th. We are reviewing an application for Austin Street lots, otherwise known as 100 to 168 New Rutherford Avenue in Charlestown. They are seeking an ADC entitlement for a master plan, as well as an ADB entitlement for one specific building within the master plan. We will first hear from the proponent on the master plan. And team, you may present whenever ready. Thank you, Mimi.
Great. Hello, everyone. Mark Klepfer. I am the team's landscape architect at Klepfer Martin Design Group, and presenting with me tonight is Kendra Hallowell from Icon Architects. All right, just to start with a few comments that were made, or just tracing the comments that were made recently on this project. We had an introduction of the BCDC, and there was the suggestion of improving pedestrian connections across the site, and with building B to be more daring with the design. We had a department meeting with the planning department on June 3rd to provide more site information on grading, and also look at reducing parking and increase the green space. And on the 4th, we got comments back from the subcommittee to focus on constraints, context, precedents, and placemaking. And so that is what I am going to show you. Our site is located on New Rutherford Avenue, and this is something of a spine that actually connects a lot of various green spaces in Charlestown. Our site is obviously the one in the yellow, and it's linking things as diverse as the community college, Hood Park, as well as some of the public spaces that are closer to the core of Charlestown, as well as North Point Park and Cambridge, through bicycle and pedestrian connections. So this is coming in a little bit closer to those, and you can see we're actually quite close to many of these spaces. This is the Millers River Littoral pedestrian path and bikeway, which we are connecting to, as well as making connections that were proposed in the Charlestown bike proposal that brings these shared use paths across our site and connecting at this intersection. Additionally, that plan proposes another bike path on the east side of New Rutherford. And you can see here the pedestrian connections that are made to the community college, to the T, and to the neighborhood at large. This is the existing site and some existing site photos for those who are not familiar with the site. I think most commissioners are pretty familiar with the site at this point. This shows the parking constraints in our neighborhood. So you can see that most streets do not allow parking, and those are indicated with the red. There's very little on-street parking that's happening here. So within our site, we're proposing a very small amount of 2-hour parking. Go through, now we're looking at the site toward the west. This is basically the context of the various roadways and highways that abut or adjacent to our site, bring people to our site in vehicles. There are a number of larger sort of entities here. There's the MBTA station, the community college as mentioned before to the north, as well as Boston Sand and Gravel to the west and Charlestown to the east. We are proposing 2 vehicular connections off of New Rutherford Avenue, one into the north parcel, one into the south parcel. There's a service road which happens behind our site, and we are staying away from that for the most part, although deliveries can be made on that road, but we're trying to keep passenger vehicles off of that to the amount, to the degree possible. There's also this important connection for most of the industrial use coming off of the Boston Sand and Gravel site, and making that connection to Rutherford that goes right through the existing middle road between parcels of the north and the south parcel. These are showing the bicycle connection. So this is what the plan previously showed. Plan Charlestown sort of prefigured this connection happening along the service road underneath the Gilmore Bridge to the community college, and also parallel to New Rutherford, and proposed another one on the east side. And also it proposes having a crossing over New Rutherford Ave that does not exist currently, which is an extension of Middle Road. These are where we are making pedestrian connections onto the site. There are 3 existing. Those happen at the corners here under the Gilmore Bridge at Austin Street intersection, and also here at the Route 1 off ramp, where there's signalized intersections. And it's also proposing another one located here if and when this becomes a signalized crossing. There are a number of other things that are constraining the site. There's a Chapter 91 line, which mostly impacts how high the buildings can be. So it's setting a 130-foot height limit within that dashed area. We're adjacent to a FEMA floodplain, although it's not really on our site except for just a small amount in the corner. The sea level rise 2070 base elevation is at 19.5 here, and you can see that that does come onto our site somewhat, mostly through Middle Road, but some of the edges are also affected. So as part of that and sort of reconciling grade with existing road elevations on New Rutherford Ave, we're proposing to basically raise the site up to elevation 21.5 on both sites. There are a number of infrastructure implications on the site as well. We have a number of BWSC lines running across our site. This one also carries with it a sort of right-of-way no build zone along the back side of our site. So that's saying how far we can place the buildings along Service Road. We have a 12-inch line, 2 12-inch lines actually coming through the south parcel. So that's also governing where buildings can be located. We have a telecom duct bank that runs basically along the sidewalk, which limits how we can do street trees. There's just a number of other implications here. The Gilmore Bridge, there's a possibility of it expanding onto our site. So this is allowing for a sidewalk to be widening across the Gilmore Bridge. So as a result of all of those constraints, the party is to create these 2 sort of open courtyards that basically shield the courtyards from I-93 and the industrial noise, with taller buildings on the west side and open toward the neighborhood, and both the north parcel and the south parcel toward the east, in order to create a sort of more open connection to the neighborhoods. Also, there's a requirement to have blue bikes on our site. There is an existing blue bike station here at the community college just across the street. So we're proposing that our station be located down here in the southern end of the south parcel, just as a way of getting some geographic distribution across the site, and also making the connection to the bikeway, which actually starts right here. In the center of both these courtyards are open spaces that are mostly lawn spaces that can be used for recreation, and even active recreation, anticipated to be sort of youth team sports in some cases, but it's intended to be sort of the nexus of these neighborhoods, people who live here and people who live adjacent, to use as open space. One thing that we've started working on since the introduction to the full BCDC 2 weeks ago was trying to unify the north and south parcel. It was a great honor to be William Rahn's last project to be seen as a member of the BCDC, and one of his suggestions was he really wanted to see the connection between the north and south parcel. And so we're proposing this ribbon link that starts to do that in the ways that we can. One of the ways that we're reinforcing that is this could be a different color pavement, probably along the public way. That might not be possible. It's sort of up to the city whether we can do that or not. But we're also proposing that there's some kind of beacons that start to connect the sites, that could be sculptural light fixtures that are picking up their cues from what happens on the on-ramp to Route 1, although probably different in character, possibly different in scale, because a different scale is necessary on this thoroughfare. We are also proposing an awful lot of vegetation as a way of creating edges to the street, connections either open or closed to the buildings, depending on the ground floor programs. Jen, do you want to take this?
Yes, great. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, everybody. So we are proposing that the 9 to 13-story taller building massing will line Service Road, Middle Road, and Gilmore Bridge. This will screen the open space from I-93 and from the traffic, and will relate to the scale of Cambridge Crossing. Next slide. Thank you. 6- and 7-story building volumes will shield the open space that Mark's creating and step down, mediating the neighborhood scale of Charlestown and sheltering these courtyard spaces. Next, thank you. These master plan guiding principles will provide consistency across the 4 parcels as they are designed and built over time. First, ground floor program uses will frame and activate the landscape spaces. Primary entrances for each building will open onto the courtyards. Clear datums will delineate the buildings at a pedestrian scale as well as from afar. The penthouse level will wrap the upper stories, aligning with the top floor of the stepped down volume along New Rutherford.
Kendra, you're about halfway.
Okay. Programmatically, the buildings are paired. Outermost buildings A and D will bookend the site and will relate to one another and express their public uses of youth recreation and arts uses through a vibrant textural expression. The 2 buildings framing Middle Road, buildings B and C, will employ transitional materials and relate to one another through more subtle textures and fenestration. Next slide.
So this is the site plan of both parcels with the ground floor programs shown. Here you can see what we've been working on the past 2 weeks is this sort of ribbon idea that moves across the sites and connects them all the way from north to south. We've also been working on just reconfiguring some of these open spaces. So here we had a double loaded parking lot. We've now broken that into 2 separate parking lots just as a way to increase the open space here. We've reduced this as plaza space, and the plaza is now sort of a widening of this ribbon that is working to connect both sites together. This still allows pedestrian vehicles that are entering the site to come in and use this turnaround to go back out again, and service vehicles can cross through the site to the loading zones on Service Road. Same thing is happening on the southern parcel where passenger vehicles can use this roundabout and return out to New Rutherford, and service vehicles can use the loading docks here, and there's another one here for building C.
I'd love to just add, I think it's important when we were in the introductory session, there was a question, why don't we make a greater connection across Middle Road? I think we're bound to maintain the crossing up along New Rutherford Avenue. That's where the improvements along New Rutherford are going to be, along that boulevard, along that street, and we're reinforcing that connection. So residents and visitors are going to sort of loop down into the sites and come back out, similar to that first diagram that Mark showed with like a necklace of open spaces off New Rutherford Avenue.
So this is zoomed into the north parcel. So here you can really start to see the grade elevation. So we're still keeping this finished floor elevation of the gallery at 28, which is roughly about 6 inches above sidewalk down here. So we think that this makes sense to have the building slightly above existing grade at the sidewalk. The other buildings are now set down to elevation 23, which again is sort of tied to where they're coming onto the site, having this zone be relatively flat, and then there's some steepness here to make the connection out the service road. So that had been a concern in the past that the lobbies of these buildings were too high. And so we sort of feel that we've got the right height now with them sitting at 23. And you can see the way that the public parts of the building are on North Rutherford. The entrance actually is from this courtyard here, provided another entrance here into the bike room on the corner. Building A's lobby is imagined here with its entrance, and it also is at elevation 23, so matching the plaza outside. These are a couple of precedents that we've been looking at for just character. One of the things that we've been really interested in looking at is how the open space starts to relate to the ground floor uses. And we think this is a pretty good idea of what that might be like. So we have a lawn space that can be used for a lot of different things. It can have trees that start to create shaded areas within the lawn as well as open lawn space in that zone. On the south parcel, we're thinking about how those building spaces can start to move out with paved areas that are adjacent to the fields. So we might have a playing field without, say, a fence located here, but enough depth to actually have a little bit of fringe space. But really, this public space is going to spill down onto the fields. And then along the driveway, which would be the north side, and the New Rutherford Ave side, we would have fences that would stop balls from going out into the street and not, having breaking that sort of connection or possibility of things moving out onto the street. So we're imagining that that type of fencing is probably more like this athletic fencing that's very transparent. In other places, like along the driveway, it might become more playful and artistic. These are a couple of precedent images. This is actually very close to our site. Ross Miller did these pieces along the Millers River Littoral Way. We're imagining some sort of beacon like this, or some sort of element that becomes really identifiable, that starts to link the north and the south parcels together as a placemaking device. So it's sort of a basic diagram. This is where we've been working for the last week, primarily on the north parcel, but here on the south parcel, we're also starting to look at dissolving this relationship of how the buildings and the field start to relate. And we might do something where the path through actually starts to become a little bit more fluid and gives us a wider zone in which to make the building to open space or lawn space a little bit more flexible. So that's something that we're still looking at. We've been primarily looking at parcel, the north parcel, for the last 2 weeks. Just to give an indication of how we imagine programming to go, this is an aerial view looking down into that site, and these are some of the programs that we imagine happening here. So a lot of the ground floor functions start to move out. We imagine that this becomes sort of a gallery art walk here at the corner. This is just a lawn space versus some things that can happen on a paved space, like food trucks could be parked in the drive court, as well as farmers market, that type of activity. Rideshare drop-off would happen in the turnaround. We have neighborhood parking for short-term in the surface lots located here and here. We've now been able to include a little bit of landscape along the edge where the building is coming down to New Rutherford, and thinking about ways to define these landscape spaces. As Century Gardens are here, we're thinking about this zone as being more like a Miyawaki forest that actually is making this delineation between the lawn and the athletic areas from the sidewalk. This is a 12-foot wide multi-function path, which is pedestrians and cycles, which are moving along this edge here. These are diagrams that I showed previously. This is how vehicles are moving, accessing the site. So the idea of pedestrian residents, passenger vehicles are coming in and going out, returning to New Rutherford and not using Service Road. And the blue lines are indicating how service vehicles access the site and where the loading zones are. And this is also showing the pedestrian connection. So the heavy red line are the major paths that are being connected across the site. The smaller ones are building entrances and making connections in a more sort of local way within the sites themselves. The blue bike stations located here and here on this one, as well as the connections that are being made to the neighborhood. There was the request for some sections. We have lots and lots of sections. I'm only going to show you 4, but we have all of these in the deck if you'd like to see them. We're going to show you the ones that are circled. So we have 2 sections along Rutherford Ave. This is at the gallery space. So here grade is starting to step down from the corner, and we're proposing steps. It's also, there's a ramp and just a sidewalk connection to the corner, which happens in this location. Street tree planting is possible here. This is closer to further down south on this north parcel. So this is next to building B. We've been able to include some landscape zone now. We have the 12-foot wide multi shared use path, and then a 3-foot wide furnishing zone. This is a section through the sort of courtyard space between A and B. So this is building A located here, the slope that is transitioning higher grades down with the lawn space. And then this is the driveway located here.
And Mark, about a minute left.
Great. So this is the courtyard space at Building B. So again, this is where the parking picks up. This is almost like a split from the previous section that you saw. Building B is located here. This is along Service Road. So here, grade is the FFE is much higher than the sidewalk, but this is mostly the shared use path that's connecting to the community college. And that is it. Happy to return to whatever you would like to see more of, since that went pretty quickly.
Mark, could you just go back to a site plan? That'd be helpful.
Back to this one.
Thank you.
So I should also say this is the site plan that was shown in the last meeting, the full commission.
All right, commissioners, who wants to get us going? I'm happy to start a little, with some comments. This is meant to be a conversation. So I'll just open it up. I think what was really good to see, Mark, was all of the constraints. This project has been defined almost by constraints. So it's helpful to see all that you're wrestling with. What I'm trying to figure out is beyond the constraints, where is there a real concept that we're, helping you expand on? And so I feel like the ribbon, this idea of a ribbon going through the site is starting to get at something that we could latch onto in terms of an idea. But even within that, it doesn't have consistencies that I'm seeing, and it's honestly because of the constraints. So we can see on the north side, this ribbon is a little bit more sinuous, and pathways, are more nuanced, but then it becomes a little bit staggered by the fields on the south parcel. And so maybe just hearing you talk a little bit about, it feels like the buildings came first and then the ribbon, and I just wonder if there's a way where the ribbon can also help to influence what's happening in the master plan. I'm just trying to grab at a concept to help talk about the planning of the site other than the constraints you've dealt with. So
Yeah, no, appreciate that comment. I think that it has been largely constrained by utilities and then where buildings can go, what those volumes need to be to provide what fits in them. I think in the last round of this, over a year ago, we also started to work on the south parcel with a path that meandered more across the site. Ultimately, we had some driveways that accommodated the industrial uses that just did not work relative to the city grid and access onto New Rutherford. So not having those has been helpful because it's allowed us to have a little bit more space to include landscape. So I think what we've done on the north side is start to free it up a little bit and not think so strictly about how the green space has to meet certain dimensional criteria, and the way that paved space and green space might start to be a little bit more blended. I think we need to do that same operation on the south side where the green space might start to become a little bit more organic in its shape, and that the ribbon then starts to border that, although not necessarily define it, to make sort of cross-site connections in a better way and make a better connection to the Millers River Littoral Way, as well as beefing up that edge that we're right now thinking about as a sort of linear Milwaukee forest. So that's sort of, you can just start to see it within the courtyard of Building C, which is located here. This also includes an area that's the exterior space for the early childhood program that's at the ground floor. And we sort of imagine that being located here, but trying to have adequate space for a robust landscape program has been a little bit challenging.
yeah, I see that Catherine has her hand raised. I'm going to pass it to her. I do think that because we're reviewing it at a master plan level, it would be helpful to see, even, you know, building C and D, adjacent open space, with some kind of programming. I guess a little bit more similar to what we're seeing on the north side, but let's see what Catherine has to say.
Thank you. Appreciate the presentation. There was a couple of things that were coming to mind for me, and especially around the use of open space. When I think about this conceptually, it's feeling like the open space is plotted last. It doesn't, there's not enough of a connective tissue to the design of all of the buildings. It's been a little lost for me throughout the presentation. So I would challenge you all to think about the actual physical design of this space as being a continuous story that's woven between both buildings. And then the other piece, as I was thinking about this particular site, because I know exactly where these roads are, is there any cause for concern around the service road and having the middle road uh, be open? And I'm saying this in the context of if residents are clustered on one side, particularly on the service road side, is there any cause of concern around noise, distraction, any of those things? Is a larger question that I have for this. And that's it.
Great. Kendra, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. I'll take a pass at this. I mean, we've been looking at this site for a couple of years now. It certainly has a significant number of constraints, you know, not least of which being busy streets on, you know, on all four sides. But this is also in the city, and there are, you know, there are busy streets and highways around much of the city, train lines cutting through the city, and we're designing this in order to create the best place we can, the most usable, the most protected open space, which is why we've placed the buildings with their back against Service Road, which is where the MBTA is and the highway is. And we've created the landscape buffer that Mark was speaking to along the edge of the playing fields on the southern site. You know, we're using the buildings as a screen wall to protect the open space and the larger neighborhood of Charlestown beyond. So we're definitely thinking about this and doing the best we can, thinking about all of these edges and creating a place we hope people will love to live.
And if I might just also add to that, to address Catherine, your concerns here. I think the city, you know, shares the concerns regarding truck traffic here on Service Road. Earlier iterations of this project, right, actually included more intervention and redesign of Service Road and Middle Road, and look to, you know, see best practices in terms of calming traffic and tightening up road radii, turning radii, and prioritizing pedestrians. Unfortunately, these particularly Middle Road and Service Road to right of Page of Middle Road really need to be priority truck routes. And so the challenge has then been how can the overall site approach, how can the accommodations for pedestrians really work around that constraint? And, you know, in part, that is what determined the channeling of pedestrian routes to be at the edge of New Rutherford. Of course, you know, Rutherford Avenue is in a state, you know, today. The city does have, you know, long-term plans to potentially, you know, turn New Rutherford into a boulevard, but, you know, that is not something, you know, on the table for the near future, and that's something that, you know, the team can design around. So we've asked them to very much try to work with the existing conditions, both on New Rutherford, Middle and Service Road, and, you know, come to as strong and strategic responses to those edges as possible.
Thank you.
Thanks, Seth. David Manfredi.
So, thank you for your presentation. I want to ask you about how you think about this site in terms of um, how where it fits in urban context versus something less than historic or traditional urban context. And here's what I mean. Yeah, this is a very hard site. Start there. Lots of things going on around you. And maybe one of the most significant is what Seth just said, the uncertainty of what Rutherford Avenue is going to look like in, I don't know how to fill in the blank, but 20 years. But there are some I think there's some clues here in how you're thinking about this that I'd like to hear you explain. And that is, and I understand the strategy of building mass against the service road, protecting the green space. And I know how hard New Rutherford is, but I see these kind of almost, I don't know, roundabouts in the middle of the site and short term, I'm sure, surface parking in the site. And it makes me think about a very, not a very, but a less urban condition, about a more suburban condition. And makes me wonder if you had an attitude about Rutherford Avenue as a boulevard and as um, a sidewalk that you wanted to walk, that engaged pedestrians, that had all of the elements that we all wanted to have, and made connectivity and took to a future Bunker Hill Community College into opportunity to find your way to Main Street in Charlestown and all of those things. What would you do differently? I guess I feel, and I guess, and I understand why, but I feel that the plan is kind of isolated, meaning it's the connections are so hard that it feels like an island, or maybe it's two islands. And I'm not really pushing hard back on that, because how do you plan for something that may happen in 20 years? But I'm wondering how I would just like to hear you, and Mark, you've been so articulate in the explanation of what you proposed. How you think about that? How you think about, first of all, bringing cars into the center of the site, providing parking for cars in the center of the site, letting them turn around and find their way back out again. And what other ways did you think about this as you came up with the plan?
Love those questions. Because, I think how I think about like a drive court to be in an urban environment is it's a drive court. It's paved and it's multi-purpose. And we started there with a paved multi-purpose drive court. But then we had the criticism that it would be great to have more green space. And yes, it would be great to have more green space. The only place to get that green space was out of these sort of more urban drive courts that were more multifunctional. So what we did was we looked at the engineering pass-throughs of a fire truck and a car and the turning radii, and wherever the cars weren't, that was green. And it's not the best way to go about site planning something. And I think the result is, you've nailed it in a way. It feels very much not urban as a result. I personally think a drive court might be better. That actually does feel more urban, and it would be urban, and can be used in a more effectively as a farmer's market, but still allow a car to turn around in it or something. So relative to those sort of cul-de-sac moments within the plan, I think that that's been an evolution. It's also been fairly much dictated to us that we have cars enter and exit from Rutherford Avenue. and we don't, the people who are, you know, circulating here don't really have access to these other industrial streets. And there's good reason for that, for safety. You know, I think safety has also been this kind of underlying concern. That's why there's one crossing at Middle Road. You know, right now there's a mid-block crossing that's like technically there, although it doesn't really make that much sense in the existing condition. It's dangerous because as the trucks are making their turn, they're picking up speed and they're about to make another turn with very large radius corners down here on Service Road. This speaks to the velocity with which these trucks are moving. So to have a connection here really is not safe, well, that's why it was decided to go here. The idea of what this becomes when it's a boulevard, I think, is a really great opportunity. So I can imagine a day when the curb moves out a little bit, that you actually have a very robust street planting that can happen all the way along here, which is not something we can do right now because of the infrastructure that's parked under our sidewalk for most of the south parcel. It might have parking, like Memorial Drive, for instance. It might not have parking. I could imagine it being great either way. If you gave up that space for parking and made it landscape, you'd have a really robust green edge there. The thing I can sort of imagine it on the north parcel more because it's trying to be that. We've got enough room for some street trees. We have enough room for landscape underneath those. So we're not imagining that to be paved. And we have a really robust sidewalk that allows peds and bicycles. When you get to the south side, it would be better to augment that with whatever changes are happening out here in the roadway, in the right of way. For now, we have made a buffer happen inboard of our property line to that street. I can imagine a day when this boulevard is something different and really wonderful. We worked on the Bund in Shanghai and it became exactly that. It used to be a highway, then it became a boulevard. And when it became a boulevard, there was the opportunity of having these parks that connected to that new boulevard. And the same thing could happen here. I would imagine that when this became a boulevard, this zone might be rethought. So right now there's a connection of this space trying to make a link to the community or to a better street here, but it's not that now. So we've buffered it with those street trees. Here, we didn't have room to do that. So we've buffered it with this. I can imagine that if this became a better landscape edge, this might become completely reconfigured. There might be a redesign of how all of this open space connects to what becomes the pedestrian section of this boulevard that could be quite rich and really pretty nice. And that's why I think we want to spend more time reconfiguring what this looks like. So there's a little bit more space and generosity of people to be able to sit and observe what's going on. If like little kids have set up soccer practice or something like that, a place for the parents to hang out and watch that, be part of that. Without it being so like just down to kind of minimums of circulation width and a little bit of space for people to be adjacent to that space and not necessarily in that space.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the answers very much. And I was wondering why you wouldn't connect New Rutherford to Service in a more urban kind of way, maybe even with parallel parking and a complete street. And what you're telling me is you can't drive out onto Service Road, which, yeah, and I love, by the way, your analogy to, or your vision that this could be Memorial Drive, meaning significant amounts of traffic and parallel parking and great sidewalks and bike paths where people want to go on a regular basis, you know, whether it's closed, whether it's Sunday or whether it's Thursday.
Yeah.
I should also mention that, you know, comments from commissioners during the earlier review of this project, I think it came up at the reintroduction, and it's been a question for staff as well, is really how the buildings and the landscape interact and meet each other, right?
Yeah.
The elevations, the ground planes. I think particularly acute is how the open space in the south lot relates to this building D, which has the youth recreation program in the base. And what you're seeing here are 3 90 by 90 fields. Originally, there were 4 90 by 90 fields, and that was a aspiration that was included in the RFP for the disposition of this as city land. There is a real intent and need for active recreation space in this area. But as we've gotten deeper into the review of this project and the constraints, city staff are asking the proponent to start looking at some options for the configuration of the southern site that maintain the spirit and the ultimate usability of the fields for some active recreation, but may relax on the actual dimensions. And so we're asking them to look at a variety of scenarios of how to achieve that, with active recreation, but perhaps creating new opportunities for different relationships to the edge along New Rutherford and the edge along Building D especially, and perhaps even the layout of the internal roadway there as well.
I just want to pick up on some of the things that David and Mimi have brought up. I remember last year, there was a road that bisected the south site that you guys called like a Woonerf or something. Am I misremembering that?
That's correct.
That's correct. And then you had on the left, on the north site, you had sort of this roadway. You flipped the site, right? If I'm remembering correctly, the lawn was on the other side, and then you had like a fire lane and other things going on.
Yes.
And I feel like there's a way in which maybe the ribbon as a concept might be limiting you. I mean, I love the idea of a ribbon, and I love the fluidity of it, especially on the north side of the site. But I see something that's happening, which is that, this is such a tough project because you've got so many constraints. And you're solving so many individual problems of all the different kind of circulations that are happening here. I just wanted to bring back the idea of the Woonerf, because I think what's happened now that I see in the plan, I think some things have really been improved, and I really like a lot of the changes. But some things I feel like the big move is that you've individualized each ribbon of movement. And what the Woonerf did for me was it became more urban. It's like consolidating parking, pedestrian movement. It had this kind of fluidity to it that's much more urban. And I don't know what the answer is, but it does feel to me that the kind of turnarounds and the parking and the kind of solutions, the resolution that they're bringing to the particular problems that you have locally are kind of making it harder to understand the conceptual framework that binds this together. So, for example, one thing that I'm not sure of, and I'm looking forward to seeing this, Mark, as you move forward, is the north and the south side. My hunch is it's very hard to connect them. It's a middle road divides it. I think we've a million times said, oh, hopefully that we could bring the ribbon across the road, and they never let us do that, right? Even in the public sidewalk, they never let us bring whatever you're considering as yellow on there. And so I just am going to ask the question. I don't know the answer to it. This is a big project. Do the two projects actually have to be the same, right? Like, can they, and I don't know if this is the right question to ask, but it feels like it's going to be difficult on the south side to make the ribbon work as elegantly as you have on the north side. And so I just wonder if you can just conceptually think about it to say, maybe they're not connected. Maybe both the architecture and landscape And it might break down the scale of this overall development in the master plan vision, rather than saying, because I see so many of these kinds of developments now happening, sprouting out up all over, everywhere, Alston, everywhere. And there is this desire to sort of make everything sort of match. And I'm not sure in terms of scale, whether that always is the right strategy. And for you, Mark, I feel like it's hemmed you in to making these the ribbon of the road, the ribbon of the pedestrian, the crossing of the two more challenging. And so it's just a question I have about the master plan is, can they connect? Should they connect? Should they be similar? Should they be cousins? Should they really feel different architecturally and in terms of the landscape? They're just all questions I have. So that's the bigger question I have. The more granular comment that I have is just I feel like maybe you could just at the master plan level think about using a third material, which is landform, to help start to kind of, when I look at the section through the south side and even through the north side, it's quite flat from the building. Like the lawn is really flat, and I feel like there's lots of opportunities, not to make, 7-foot tall landforms, but to do these kind of very subtle, like the landforms you find in these London parks where you can't almost tell that they're there until like you guys do such a beautiful job of like regrading slopes. I remember seeing my son when he was like in second grade running and then disappearing and realizing this plane of lawn was actually lifting up because he just disappeared. I mean, he may have only been like 3.5 feet tall at that time. But I just wonder if there's like in the sections, which I found so helpful to see, just because I feel like more and more we're seeing all the landscape always just in plan. But I wonder if there's a way in which like the edges, at least temporarily until New Rutherford becomes a boulevard, could become a little more protected and have like maybe some landform movement with the planting that you're discussing. And same thing with North Side. I think there's a lot of interesting things here in terms of space allocation, but there's a larger kind of conceptual underpinning that I'd love for you to just think about and kind of come back with a really strong point of view. Like, no, they're not connected. Yes, they are connected. Yes, it is a ribbon, or there's a kind of more free flow between vehicles. I personally just love Blue Nerfs. I think they work really well in these residential settings as well. So there's a lot of interesting things from what I remember seeing before, and they're sort of at the formative stage. So as you said, you've been kind of developing these from 2 weeks ago, and I'm just looking forward to seeing how you guys continue to work this out.
Yeah, I appreciate that. To me, the best part right now is right here,
Yeah,
where you
I
do
agree with
actually go
you.
from 28 down to 23, and that
Mhm.
allows something like a
And it
stair and a
creates
ramp,
like a
and
room there. I think there's something very lovely in the way that the path becomes a plaza. And I just wonder if you stop drawing, maybe there are places where the yellow color and the tan color don't have to be so segregated. Now, I
Mhm.
know that can be dangerous, but maybe as an exercise, it might help because I do like, I almost like when I look at the north side, if I take away the tan, I I really like the project.
Mhm.
And so maybe there's a way, I don't have the answer, but I just wonder if the tan could take on some of the gestures of the yellow.
Great. Oh, those are great comments.
I'll chime in. There was a drawing that I thought was a really nice way to describe the architecture. It's an axon drawing, and it had the volumes, the 6 to 7 story height volumes, clearly identified, and maybe, as part of the master plan strategy, I really thought that this was strong, and it had that consistency of, oh, I get it. The, back portion of the buildings has a linear relationship parallel to the service road in 93, and is the, contains that open space. This feels really good. But I really feel like in terms of the master plan, relating, those frontispieces and thinking about the architecture is a really nice way of setting it up, as those are, the maybe those are the special moments in relationship to the back bar, which could be pretty simple in terms of the architecture and where you put the emphasis on the design elements. You've kind of are starting to suggest that in shape of the building one on building A. But that's just a comment. It doesn't seem like, from what you showed in the material strategy, that you have that same strategy in mind for those volumes. I know we're going to transition to architecture next, but I do think that, dependent on what you decide, is if this is a cohesive site, or, the block A and B is separate from C and D. I do think that at least could be one of the elements that ties it together, these lower form buildings, and how you treat them in terms of materiality and distinctness from the back portion of the bar. So this is just a nice diagram that helps explain it for me.
Thanks, Mimi. Yeah. If I may note, I think when we came to BCDC a year ago, we did have an approach where we were treating the north site as a pair of buildings that were closely related, and C and D on the southern parcel were a pair of buildings that were closely related. We have since sort of shifted. I think, Mark, would you go a couple of slides forward to where we've got the pink outer boxes? Other way, maybe. Jen, maybe you're driving, I'm not sure.
Got it.
Couple, maybe one more or three more, sorry, where we've got the pink boxes on the corner, right? So C, B, and C are really framing Middle Road, so there is a relationship there. Right, we're going to be talking about building B in a moment, but the two around Middle Road do need to relate. They are framing that road in particular. Buildings A and D have programmatic differences. Building A has this gallery. It's very public facing. It wants to express this community of arts within this building. It's up at the corner of Austin Street, so that wants to be vibrant and expressive. And similarly, on the bottom of the southern parcel, Building D has the youth recreation, which also has a larger expression. So we've sort of shifted from where we were a year ago to a slightly more subtle but relative approach, right? There are layers of relation between the buildings.
Yeah, and I think that could be a nice distinction, like what's more, public facing and what's more residential. So I think that could work as a strategy. Can I just ask one? It's actually quite a minor detail, but as
Sure.
McYoung was going over her comments, I am curious why building D, the elevation of the ground level, is so much higher than the lawn to create what seems to be long ramps and stairs. Like, what is that height difference, and could that be more achieved through like a landform or something that makes that elevation change seem less of a built condition?
Right. I mean, this site is a bowl. The high points are up at, I'll say, up at the gallery at Austin Street and at the corner by the youth recreation. I think we're up at 28, 29. At the middle, we're down at 18. So there's a significant grade change that we're working on. I think it's also notable, we are currently showing we're planning to put parking underneath these buildings, and we are in a flood zone, so we have to lift these up, right? So our first floor level wants to be at elevation 21. So all these are reasons to lift the buildings up. I know urbanistically, programmatically, for access, we want those ground floors to be at grade. We have just pushed the ground level for the lobby of building A, probably at the expense of some parking, push that down to meet the same floor level as building B, which does not intend to have parking underneath it. So it's got some flexibility there. I think we'll continue to explore building B and that floor level relation as well. You know, I think there's potentially an opportunity there as well, much like at building A where the gallery opens up and then there's the walkway and the large boulders that can step down and the grade changes down to that lower level. You know, that might be something that we could do similarly as a seating area to overlook the open space on the southern parcel.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know that I followed all of that specifically, but the elevation, the first floor elevation of D is
Yes.
what?
I think
What is that
it's at
elevation?
26.
It's at 26 and the fields are at
23, 24.
Right.
okay, so it's a 5 foot and that is necessary only to tuck parking underneath.
It's a couple of feet. Mark, did you say it's at 24, right?
Yeah, 23,
Right.
24.
And the ground
Yeah.
level, I believe, is at 26. So it's 2 feet up.
Okay. I was hearing 5. All right. Well, I
we're-
think, yeah, I think that relationship wants to reduce as much as possible.
Yeah.
As Seth said, relaxing the size of these fields and actually giving us some more latitude of how we actually use horizontal space will make significant difference. That it was hard to shoehorn everything in at the sizes they were. And so that's how you get these abrupt walls to be the transitions between things. So I'm looking forward to not having that constraint any longer.
Yeah. Maintaining the spirit of of open playing fields for kids to kick a ball around.
I'm realizing,
and people to be on the fringes of it. Yeah.
yeah, I'm realizing when we transition to building B, I'm not going to have the opportunity to just ask the question about the N conditions, the short sides of D, C, B, and A. Each one of them has a slightly different condition. D and A are flush. C has a step. B and C facing middle road have a chamfer. B has a half chamfer. I want to see consistency to build your diagram up a bit. And so that I'm just going to leave that. You don't even have to answer,
Right.
but it's just.
I hear you. I hear you. I think further simplification maybe will provide us greater flexibility in the future. Thank you.
Seth, should we move to the, or
Yes,
are you
I
going
was-
to take up public comment on the master plan first?
I was about to say we just hit about 37 minutes and actually we'd move to the presentation for building B, commissioner comments and then public comments.
Okay.
And then discussion of next steps. I did just want to mention that yes, as part of the master plan, phase consistent with how we handle ADC projects, we'll be looking for the proponent to put together a set of clear design guidelines that speak to the overriding principles behind this so that as each of the buildings gets designed in the future, whenever that is, right, there are some principles that they follow. There are some things that we may want to keep as harder principles and guidelines, and then other things that allow more flexibility for individual expression. And the question really is, what are those elements and features of the buildings that we want to have a certain amount of, let's say, predictability over in the master plan, and what do we want to continue to allow flexibility for? So with that, I will ask the proponent to move on for building B. And you have 15 minutes. I will give you a halftime and 1 minute warning.
All right, let me just hit send on my notes. Okay. Great. I'm looking for the share button. Great, thanks everyone. I wasn't ready for quite the quick transition. So can you all see my screen? Yes, wonderful,
Yes.
thank you. All right, the proposed first phase consists of building B through the large project review. Referring back to the massing approach and master design guidelines we looked at a few minutes ago, we'll focus in on building B. Backing up to Service Road and Middle Road, the taller portion of the building sets a backdrop for the new community. The lower volume shields the open space and reaches toward the future faceted corner of Building A, mediating towards the neighborhood scale of Charlestown's residential homes. Following the master plan guiding principles, Building B's ground floor program uses frame and activate the landscape spaces. And the primary entrances will open onto the courtyard set back from busy New Rutherford Avenue, at least as it is today. Clear datums will delineate the building at a pedestrian scale, setting the L and the shield to provide pedestrian scaled architectural elements. Oops, sorry. The penthouse level will wrap the upper stories and align with the top floor of the stepping down volume along New Rutherford. Following through on the volumetric and material relationships, buildings B and C will frame Middle Road and will employ transitional materials relating to one another through subtle textures and fenestration. Phase 1 includes the new building, the adjacent drive, turnaround, and landscaped courtyard and open lawn, as well as the adjacent shared pathway for bikes and pedestrians across the 3 sides of the Phase 1 site, New Rutherford, Middle, and Service Roads. We've shared that there is only one crossing at Middle Road. All pedestrians and bikes will be crossing at New Rutherford Edge. The site is well connected with larger Charlestown and the Orange Line. The enhancement plan is in the works for New Rutherford that will create more pedestrian-friendly crossings. In addition, there's a pedestrian connection under the Gilmore Bridge directly to the MBTA station. The building is oriented inward, creating a sheltered courtyard oasis for the residents. Lobby and amenity spaces activate the street, while the main entrance is set within the courtyard, adjacent to short-term parking and casual seating. A secondary entrance at New Rutherford and Middle Road will house a bike lounge celebrating active transit at this location. Services and back of house will be along Service Road. As part of the overall master plan, the gallery space will support live-work spaces on the lower level that will open out and increase activity on the lawn and patio area, bringing community uses onto the site. The massing and circulation party highlights 3 key ideas. The courtyard will provide protected open space. The primary entry is recessed from the street for a more residential scale, and 2 distinct volumes will create a courtyard. We've looked to nearby buildings for inspiration, drawing on Charlestown's community to ground the design in its context. Strong delineation of the attic story and thoughtful detailing will root this new architecture into the neighborhood. We've adjusted the building's proportions to create a grounded base with contemporary masonry detailing, topped by a crisp, clean attic story clad in metal panel. The design takes a transitional approach, rooted in Charlestown's architectural character, but expressed with a modern sensibility. This 5/2 podium structure offers a cost-effective yet durable solution. Masonry is carried up to the 5th floor, the maximum allowed by this construction type, to convey a sense of permanence. Above, the lighter attic story provides contrast and relief through refined details. Together, these elements offer early residents a complete and secure home, even as the broader site continues to develop. Based on the master plan guiding principles, we've defined the base, middle, and top, activated the ground level through active ground floor uses while stepping down towards the Charlestown neighborhood. This is the existing view from Austin Street looking south. We'll take a look around the site and the building design. The proposed perspective from the same corner presents a welcoming courtyard defined by a warm textured facade that establishes a sense of place. The top floor amenity aligns visually with the Bunker Hill Monument, establishing a connection with this prominent landmark. Broad pathways linked by streetscape markers will draw visitors into the site and foster engagement among residents and guests, seamlessly integrating the building within the broader context and cultural context. The adjacent lawn and plaza are envisioned as a flexible community space, supporting events such as Touch a Truck, arts festivals, farmers markets, and more. As the first to be built, the structure will stand alone for some time. It needs to feel complete and resilient, anchored within an evolving site. The design is intentionally understated, a simple transitional envelope that doesn't demand attention, but sets a thoughtful tone for future phases where there's room for a more contemporary voice. Views around the building highlight a robust masonry base with depth and articulation topped by a contemporary attic story. The corner entrance anchors the bike lounge, featuring large windows that showcase its use. Soldier coursing at heads and sills reinforce regular window spacing. Along New Rutherford, windows convey a residential language referencing the neighborhood across the way. Responding to the site's large radius curbs, both buildings A and B feature faceted corners that articulate their relationship to the site boundaries. The building massing is articulated by an inset volume that creates a visual break between forms. The lower shield volume along New Rutherford is distinctly separated from the taller structure behind, emphasizing a layered and dynamic composition. The facade depth is further enhanced by masonry patterns and cast stone bands, providing a variety of textures near pedestrian scale. Following the grade at the low point on the site, here at the corner of Middle Road, planters will line the base of the building and protect the corner entrance at the shared path. Views around the building showcase robust materials with a two-story base expressed through paired vertical windows seated on the cast stone base. This regular rhythm of windows in a planar facade reflects a typical edge building character found throughout the Charlestown perimeter. We propose a contemporary masonry wrap with punched windows as a buffer to the highway. The windows are sized for passive house construction, but they also limit views of traffic on the highway. As part of the building's envelope and systems, fresh air will be ducted to every bedroom, as these buildings are a protective layer between the highway and the open space fields.
Kendra, you're a bit over halfway.
Plenty of time. The lawn is designed to be enjoyed year-round, offering flexible open space in all seasons. The adjacent parking areas can be repurposed for community events or plaza use, enhancing the site's versatility. Our vision is for this to become a welcoming and active space, one that invites both residents and the broader Charlestown community to gather, relax, and connect. And with that, thank you.
Commissioners, comments? Kendra, if you could leave your presentation up, we'll want to reference it.
Certainly. Just let me know where you'd like me to share.
I think you can leave it on this image. Seeing no hands raised, I'll just say that, you know, the diagram that you have of these shorter buildings, you call them the shields and the L's in the back, is so prescriptive and makes me think of, you know, how this is going to get resolved. but it actually isn't resolved in a way that I thought. I thought the L would just render differently than the frontispiece. And maybe it does in the, lack of texture on the back volume versus the front volume. But I don't think you're getting the reading that you were suggesting in the diagram by even just having what you call the attic floors, or we referenced it as the top floor. I just really wonder if compositionally that just wants to be one piece that's distinct. And again, that's where you put all of the architectural emphasis, and the back volumes, that L shape becomes simpler, could even become simpler in terms of material renditions.
Hmm.
This is this because building B is coming first. I'm just worried that it's going to set the language for buildings A, C, and D. And I thought that the diagram that you suggested with those frontispieces had a lot more promise that I'm seeing in the way you're resolving the material choices here.
So it seems that the front and the shield and the L would have taken more differentiation between the two.
Yes, that's what I
Yeah.
was reading in the diagrams.
Thank you.
Maybe
Okay.
what would be
Yeah.
helpful is to go also to that precedent page where you had really close-ups of the precedents and your axon
Yeah.
rendering, because I really started to see, pattern and texture and color that was nice in the precedent images. And what's this, every one of them is distinct. The one on the, far left is creating texture and pattern to reveal a pilaster approach. The second one in is a double order with a frame set back. And I thought, that could be an interesting approach. And the latter is really shifting windows that are connected by pattern. I don't, maybe these are all just suggested a brick, but some of those strategies would be nice to see in what you're proposing here, that I'm not necessarily finding that tie-in. Maybe we'll pass it on to David and see if he can help me out here.
Well, I'm glad you referred back to this this image, because I was thinking about the same thing, and I think what all three of those are different, and more detail, more precise detail, really elegant detail on the left, and on the right, quite simple and punched, but regular on the left, and sort of sliding masonry openings on the right. The middle is probably my least favorite, but they're all good. They all have a strong strategy. The other thing they all have in common is some vertical proportions that
Right.
I think really help the just the building wall. And when I look at the elevations on the right, the horizontally, the bands of brick and the bands of masonry opening are, I know they're not the same, but boy, they're really close. And
Right.
they don't create a kind of order about just the simple building itself. Now I know that building on the left, and it's a beautiful building and beautifully detailed, and it's probably got detail in there that would add significant cost to where you want to be. But I think it's more about the proportions of masonry openings in a brick wall. And you said you wanted to do this as passive house, and so you've got 30% of the wall to open. But I think you can be just more have a I think the way Mimi said it, have an attitude about it that it's either going to be quite formal and regular, and in some ways very traditional, or it's going to be more active and irregular, but without changing that general proportion and without having to do all that detail. I think the other thing that, so now go back to that view you had a moment ago, that was the view across the four buildings looking, I guess, from north to south.
Sure.
Yeah. And you had maybe it's the one after this, yeah, which is just a little bit closer in. And of course it makes, these makes you wonder. I've got four buildings and we're looking at one building. And I think what Mimi was suggesting was that there's a way to think about the building envelope that reinforces the diagram. And I would describe the diagram this way, your planning diagram, that there is along the service road and 93, you're building a wall. I don't mean that in a bad way at all.
Yeah.
You're building, you're recognizing that I've got this enormous superstructure of 93. I've got a very unfriendly service road. It is what it is, and I'm making a wall, and in front of it, I'm building almost. I'm building smaller. I'm going to say, I wish the difference between the two heights was more, but I'm not going there. So that there's a wall and there's a pavilion. There's a wall and there's a hierarchy of these parts. And if I look at all four buildings and I start to think that, okay, there's four walls and there's four pavilions, and I'm not suggesting that they're the same. I'm suggesting that they have a language. And maybe the wall buildings can be quite regular and the pavilions can be more irregular. And you're starting to do that in the geometry and the massing. And I wonder if you just don't push that whole idea even farther. And then there's the connection between the two. And I don't know if that's a third part, but it could be. And it could be different in the different buildings because they connect in different ways according to the geometry of the site. And almost as if there's a city side that is of the material palette of, Main Street, Charlestown, and there's a infrastructure side that is a material palette of infrastructure. And I don't mean that I think that can be very powerful. I'm actually thinking of I'll give you a very specific example of when I was listening to Mimi and I was thinking about the building that on Harrison Avenue across the street from the cathedral, that is this beautifully detailed, very simple horizontal corrugated metal clad building that I drive past every single morning, and I've looked at every detail on that building, and the contrast of those two things. If I looked at the building that was on the far left in your precedence, and then the building that I'm talking about, I think that could really be quite an exciting way to think about this. And all I'm suggesting, I think all Mimi's suggesting, is you've created a diagram in master plan. How do you take that into the whole thing? How do you take that diagram and make it architecture? If maybe it's a way of saying I don't know if there's I probably shouldn't go there, but I will anyway. That 60% or 70% of the actual building mass is of a more of a very tight building envelope budget, and then these 4 pavilions that face Charlestown, that face the town, are of a different budget, and rather than taking it and smearing it across the whole thing.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what I was trying to suggest too, David, and I'm glad you were clear about that. I think putting, the details and the really emphasis on the pavilion shields, whatever we want to call them, is really really smart strategy. And then the wall portion can be pretty simple. And I don't know that it has to be brick, because I do know that these projects really require tight budgets. And so maybe that's becomes a simpler material. But that horizontal datum at the top of the 5th floor, honestly, is, I think, the thing that really doesn't support your idea. And I just wonder if it just should just be all one material, color at the front, a red brick, and then all the back, for instance, could be a buff or a different material. And I just wonder if that helps distinguish the special part from the more, fabric part
Yeah.
of your building.
How do you feel this should relate to the Charlestown context? It's a new building, it's across, a great chasm, right? Rutherford is a big separation, but we're trying to connect this to the larger neighborhood. This is going to be 123 new affordable apartments, the first building out of the gate. How do you think that this can relate to the residential and commercial neighborhood nearby?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a good question. I'm not sure that I would, have chosen every one of these images as speaking to Charlestown. But I do think in your material choices, you've already started to talk about how to tie in with those lower volumes being the brick materials. Not every one of these has a base, middle, and top. Most of them do. I will acknowledge that, but I think, mhm,
It can be interpreted, right?
yeah,
Sure.
like the historic Charlestown has a materiality that's consistent from, the the base up. That is actually, but it has a very distinctive approach to the apertures at the top level that very much says top, but not necessarily a material choice
Or change, right?
or change. Yeah.
Okay.
I guess I've been converted by Mark's um, um, vision of Memorial Drive, and so I can imagine a future in which Rutherford Avenue is Memorial Drive, and the buildings there are quite um, elegant and traditional in their material palette, and yet I've still got this monstrous 93 thing behind me, and okay, that's that's the edge of the neighborhood, and I can have a city side. You've stepped down the scale, you've reduced the footprint on that side, you've made these smaller pieces, which are all good things, and then I've got to build an edge against that fearsome I-93.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Kendra, I think you even talked about the relationship to Cambridge Crossing, which, those buildings don't at all, they're very modern in their language, and maybe you don't want to go there for the back bars, but I think that gives you a little bit of an alibi to be, contextual to that. And then the smaller buildings, are the ones, the pavilion pieces are the ones that do relate back to the fabric of Charlestown.
I can see that. I could get behind that. Thank you.
Okay, commissioners, any other comments, or should I see if there is any public testimony?
I think sounds like we're ready for public testimony.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so.
Okay. So at this time, I'd like to invite any member of the public to contribute public testimony by raising your digital hand, or if you are dialing in by phone, to press *9 and then *6 to unmute yourself. Please identify any relevant project affiliation information and keep your comments to 2 minutes. Is there any public testimony? Okay, commissioners, I am not seeing any public testimony, so I will conclude that part of the evening and turn it back to commissioners to talk next steps. I think there was a lot of good content and good discussion tonight for the proponent to consider as they move forward.
So I think we have to decide as a commission what we like to do. I think there was a lot of good comments that we heard tonight. I do want to support Seth's idea for the master plan because I was remiss into even thinking about some guidelines, but that would be really, really helpful because we may not see these buildings A, C, and D for, you know, a while, and just to remind ourselves of some of the guidelines. And I don't think that the guidelines are constraints. So that would be really helpful to see next time as far as the master plan discussion.
Could I may I? Could I respond? Because we've put forth what we think are master plan guiding principles here. And if I could use, I guess, further advice then if we're not conveying that clearly enough or going into enough detail.
Yeah, Kendra, I don't think there is enough. I'm not seeing principles that we could latch onto and know how to direct future buildings in the master plan portion. So I think that would be, and it'd be nice to show examples, Seth, of what we're referring to. I'm thinking of the LMA had some really good guiding principles, but it might be helpful to think of other examples.
Yes.
For sure.
Yes, and we will certainly share with the proponent team some guidelines documents that we've worked on with other proponents for other ADC master plans as precedent examples to riff off of.
Yeah.
Beth, I do
Dorchester
think,
Bay. Yeah.
Yep, including Dorchester Bay City, 35 to 75 Morrissey, among others. And I do want to mention that in the chat, there is somebody who would like to offer public testimony, but was not able to raise their hand before. Commissioners, if you're amenable to going back to public testimony for a minute.
Sure.
Okay, I'm not going to necessarily bring up the slides here, but Andrew McDonough, I'm going to elevate you to co-host. Just give me 1 second. Okay, Andrew, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Hi. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Thank you. I apologize for my technical difficulties. I am a longtime Charlestown resident. I walk past this site every week on my way to work. I think this project, as it is currently proposed, is aesthetically pleasing, especially the simple masonry details. I actually like the differentiation that exists on the attic level here, but I do think that it's a matter of taste, and so there's always going to be some disagreement about that. I would be excited to see this project replace the pretty desolate parking lots that are currently on this site. I recently became a homeowner in Charlestown, but during the many years that I rented in Boston, I would have loved to live in a complex like the one that's proposed here. So I urge the commission to expeditiously approve this project, both because I think it's aesthetically very pleasing and fitting with neighborhood character, and because we desperately need new housing stock in Massachusetts. And this project seems as good or better than the vast majority of the existing housing stock. I don't know the last time that anyone has attempted to find a new place to rent or to buy, but this project, even the exterior seems great. That's the end of the testimony. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And before I move on, just want to confirm if there's any other public testimony. If anyone is having problems raising their hand, you can put your desire to give testimony in the chat. Okay, commissioners, not seeing any more. I'll turn it back to you for further discussion.
I mean, I was going to say, Seth, I think that the way this was set up today was very effective. So as the project moves forward, I think having both the principles of the master plan and then the kind of details of the project itself I would just advocate to continue to do that, as I imagine there'll be new parties viewing the project as we move forward. The only other request that I have is maybe if there is going to be such a long lapse of time between this phase and future phases, that we could see what the project looks like without those massings of buildings. And I know it's a tough thing to show, but it would be helpful to see what that, we've all been on projects where there's like future phases, but it just would be helpful to see how that singular building works on its own. So there were some nice perspectives you guys had where you showed the future buildings in gray, and it would be great to like zoom out a little bit and see the gray buildings removed and maybe some existing condition photos of what you would actually see. Because maybe you'll need some screening or something like that in this first phase of work. But I did appreciate kind of the discussion going back and forth between the kind of macro to the micro and then back to the macro. And I think that's going to make a stronger project.
Okay, commissioners, unless there are no other comments, at this time and in lieu of a formal vote, it's my understanding that the proposed project is recommended for additional review at Design Review Subcommittee. There are no provisos at this meeting because there's no vote occurring, but I think there was a lot of excellent feedback given today. The presentations will be made available on the website, as will the recording on the city YouTube channel within a couple of days. And with that, I'd like to thank the proponent this evening and thank the public for joining us, as well as, of course, the commissioners for your time and dedication in helping to make the city a more beautiful place. Thank you all, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
night, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good night.